got a question recently about favorite archaeology movies. So I thought I'd make a list and go down the list, and I've done a top 10. So these are my top 10 favorite archaeology movies. Now they're not documentaries. These are, fiction, fun ones that give you a taste for archaeology, but are just fun to watch. So in no particular order, except for number one, the rest just kind of come up. Number one, my number one favorite archaeology movie of all time, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Come on, right? Raiders of the Lost Ark deserves its praise. Why is it my top 10 pick, right? Why is it number one? It's because it gives us the archetype of what an archaeologist is. Now, that might not be true to reality, but it's a stamp of like the brand of archaeology. So for better and worse, and honestly, I would tend to argue for the better. Having a young Harrison Ford as the poster child for your discipline, that's a positive. And although, of course, if we're saying, oh, but have you seen the lab work that Indiana Jones did? You're missing the point, right? It instills that sense of wonder, of excitement about archaeology. And again, more than anything, it makes that iconic hero character that is just a fantastic thing for any discipline to have. So that's my number one pick, just to get that out of the way. And I would also add Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade to it. So I would kind of use that as my number one pick. But of course, it's Raiders of the Lost Ark at the top. Now, for number two, now from here on, I'm just going to talk about each movie and why. Why is it on my list for my top 10? Number two, National Treasure. Came out the better part of 20 years ago at this point. Nicolas Cage. Why did I put National Treasure on my list? It's not my favorite movie by far on this list, but it taps into that vein of the secret history of the United States, right? That what's behind the closed doors of government. And I think they do a really good job of taking that kind of what if, that thing that all of us as Americans are kind of a little curious about, right? And they blow it up into this very much larger than life story. So my why for number two is it taps into that secret government history thing that a lot of us are into. I think it does a good job of that. All right, number three, this is a tough one. I'm going with Lost City of Z. And I almost didn't put Lost City of Z on this list. Maybe because I'm too afraid to admit that certain parts of Lost City of Z are so honest about what archaeology is like. There's a couple scenes in that of those guys like trekking through the jungle, carrying all their mapping equipment, where I was like, oh my God, it's a film of me from 2003. Those moments in there are so true. The day-to-day operations when you're far out on an archaeology project, I think they hit those really well. And that feeling of kind of bushwhacking through the jungle, the toughness of the jungle, the unrelenting aspect of the jungle, I think Lost City of Z really nails it. So at the same time, Lost City of Z is kind of a collection of the worst days ever in archaeology. So if you watch Lost City of Z, don't think that every day in archaeology is like that. But the arduousness of the trail, I think, is my why for Lost City of Z. Number four, The Mummy. And specifically the Brendan Fraser ones. Mummy Returns, Long Lost Son of the Mummy, whatever. The Brendan Fraser ones, I think, really nail that kind of swashbuckling call back to the glory days of Hollywood, this kind of thing. And of course, the Egyptian vibe. So The Mummy not only hits that Egyptian thing, which I think we can all vote as kind of the most iconic culture in archaeology. So it hits that, and it also, at the same time, harkens back to that 1920s golden era of Hollywood. So it kind of brings both of those themes back. And of course, it's playing off the original Mummy movie of the 1930s. So I think The Mummy belongs on, and the why is that romanticized Egyptology exploration sort of thing, and adding in a bit of the camp and the horror, you know, from the 1930s on. It's well done. Where am I at? Number 5, Stargate. I think the Stargate movie does a great job with the Egypt thing as well, but it wraps in the Ancient Aliens vibe, the what if, ooh, it's aliens kind of thing. Now, of course, there's no such thing, but who cares? Stargate's a really fun exploration in just going for it, right? Like, just guess what? Not only is there aliens, there's a ton of them, and they're super smart, you know. They do it all, and a little extra bonus point for Stargate for really touching on the harshness of sort of the academic who doesn't get his praise, you know, the day-to-day of the academic character early on is funny for those of us who work in academia. So Stargate, well done. Number 6, The English Patient. Absolutely, The English Patient is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's definitely my top 5. English Patient came out in 1996, and oddly, it's been forgotten by the generation of the now. Sometimes I ask my students about certain movies. Oh, do you know this? Do you not know this? Something like Silence of the Lambs, I'll ask them about that, and everyone knows that. And it came out in 91. English Patient, I ask my students, 2 hands come up. English Patient is fantastic because it brings archaeology into a love story and a romance, right? It's rare to see that kind of thing, but they nail it with English Patient. It's also very historically accurate. It also, kind of like Lost City of Z, angles into what's the daily life in archaeology really like. One aspect, and we'll have to wait while large helicopter goes over. The downside of not recording in my office. Large helicopter. I'm also using a mic to like really focus on my own voice. So anyway, English Patient, why it's so good. It pulls that romantic narrative, and then the reality though, like the day-to-day working, the finding of a very exciting discovery, the cave of the swimmers in English Patient, which is a real thing, and the kind of getting lost, the driving in a truck for a long time, the having to camp overnight in a place where you didn't think you were going to camp. It's really good. Oh, and also the comparison between the very dirty everyday field and then having to get like super dressed up for some sort of government function. That happens in archaeology sometimes. English Patient, great. Watch The English Patient. Number 7, Pirates of the Caribbean. Now, Pirates of the Caribbean isn't specifically archaeology, but I count it because it kind of goes with the underwater archaeology vibe, and it goes with the whole army treasure thing. Now, you guys know my view on the whole army treasure thing. It drives me crazy. But people are interested in it. What's not to like about Pirates of the Caribbean? You know, it's a super fun, just romp through this romanticized Caribbean, you know, of the 1700s, I guess. And you know, for me, working in Belize, which is on the Caribbean, I love the kind of hearkening back, the Port Royal, Jamaica aspect of it, which actually Port Royal was is a real current archaeology site that underwater archaeologists work at. Pirates of the Caribbean. Number 8, Time Bandits. Now, Time Bandits is also kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's not specifically about archaeology, but it's very much about like prehistory. and the sort of famous classical archaeology of Greece and Rome and this kind of thing. Now, Time Bandits, if you don't know it, sometimes it gets lost because it seems like a kid's movie, but it's great. There's a bunch of the Monty Python guys were involved in it. It's basically about like a 12-year-old kid who goes on an adventure through time with a bunch of little people and meets these kind of iconic characters that a 12-year-old would have in their imagination. So extremely romanticized moments in archaeology. There's a lot in there with like Agamemnon and that kind of thing. Really great. Every time I see it, in my head, I'm like, return what you have stolen. Watch it. And the never-ending use of the map. Very archaeological, actually. Using maps all the time. Okay. So that was number 8. This is where we take the pause before the final 2 of movies that didn't make it. And I have 3 off the top of my head that aren't on my top 10 list for various reasons. The first one is Tomb Raider, and I think that is classically on a top 10 list. I have no problem with it being on other people's top 10 archaeology movie list. But Tomb Raider just never hooked me. I've watched it before, but I don't remember it well, you know? And it just, whenever a movie is a bit of a chore to watch, that's not a good sign. So I think a lot of people really dig Tomb Raider, but it just didn't make my list because it just didn't get his hooks in. The Goonies, which this is almost like an honorable mention. It's not on my top 10 list, but The Goonies, great 1980s adventure, and a couple things on that. It really does a great job of adventure can be at home. There's an adventure around every corner, you know. What secrets are there in your town? The Goonies, it almost makes my list. Maybe it does. Also, if you're a fan of Stranger Things, look and see where Stranger Things ripped off like 4,000 moments. And finally, not on my list, Apocalypto. I got like grave concerns about Apocalypto. I don't like it. Why don't I like Apocalypto? It's because Apocalypto tries to look like it's real, right? That's what I hate about it, because it's not. It's very historically inaccurate. If it was historically accurate, I wouldn't mind so much, but you have to be like a Mayanist like me to really see how far off it is. I understand for a normal audience member that if they watch Apocalypto, they would think it was like historical fiction, you know, but it's not. So I really give it like a black mark of doom and gloom because it purveys itself to be something it's not, you know. So boo, Apocalypto. Back to my final 2. Number 9, and these final 2 are a little more off the beaten path, but they mean a lot to me and they really hit home for me for very specific reasons. Number 9 is Contact. Now, Contact is not about archaeology, it's about astronomy. But the backstory with the academic woes behind the scene that the Jodie Foster character has to go through, so perfectly done. Carl Sagan, of course, knew the background in the academic world. Both Jodie Foster as this overbearing, like at all costs, must do her research, you know. We all know that person in academia who just, no life, they're just doing it, they're just nonstop, they're all in, you know, for better or worse. We all know that character. And the other character that I almost love even more, the Tom Skerritt asshole academic. Oh, perfect. Everyone in academia knows that Tom Skerritt take credit for everything, you know, steal from others, but for whatever reason they have like connections with the media and they make it seem like they did it all. Oh, there's one guy in my archaeology life that I think of every time I see that guy, and there's a top 3 or 4 too. Those guys are out there. So Contact I love for that behind the scenes, trying to keep your project alive. having to be so passionate about what you do. You never have enough money. You're always asking for grants and all of that. It's well done, Contact. Also, one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time anyways. I love it. Number 10. This will be, not everyone's going to be expecting this one. Almost Famous. Almost Famous came out in 2000. It's a Cameron Crowe movie. It's about rock and roll. You're like, Kinkella, what does this have to do about archaeology? Okay. Almost Famous might be my favorite movie of all time. It's definitely my top 5. Why? Because even though it's not about archaeology at all, it nails what it's like to be on an archaeology crew. The social dynamic of living with a handful of people for months on end and what that entails and the relationships that kind of come and go, these like strong relationships that are forged and these other ones that kind of come together and then go away, you know, and then sort of once you get home, you kind of, it was all a dream, you know. Especially there's a scene in Almost Famous that really hits home to me where, if you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it, but it's after the airplane scene. All of them, it's like the rock band plus a reporter and a couple other hanger-ons. They're all walking down this corridor in silence because everyone is absolutely sick of everyone else. Like, you don't even want to see them because your hatred is so black for everyone else because you are exhausted. And Almost Famous nails those moments of what it's like to be on an archaeology crew. So I love it for that. So there you go. That's my top 10 archaeology movies of all time and the why I chose them. Catch you next time.